Die Hard, Terminator, RoboCop. Those are the names everyone reaches for when the conversation turns to 80s action. Fair enough, those are masterpieces. But there's an entire parallel canon that built its legend somewhere more intimate, more chaotic, more accidental. Not in multiplexes. On cable television. Films so perfectly engineered for the channel surf that they could hook you from the middle of a chase scene before you even knew the title. Films with charismatic leads, unforgettable set pieces, and quotable lines so dense that TBS could cut to commercial and come back and you'd still be completely invested. Films that, by any box office standard, should have been footnotes, but became mythology instead. This list is going to show you what you missed, recontextualize what you thought you knew, and prove that cable television built a cinematic canon that streaming will never replicate. Let's get into it. Number 10, The Soldier, 1982. At number 10, the most important choice on this entire list, not because it's the best, but because it's the most honest test of whether you're actually in this conversation. Where most Cold War thrillers of the early 80s went slow and procedural, The Soldier went the opposite direction entirely. Pure kinetic brutality, assembled for maximum velocity and minimum patience. Directed by James Glickenhaus, who gave us The Exterminator 2 years earlier. The Soldier follows the CIA's most deniable operative as he races to stop a PLO cell from detonating a nuclear device hidden in the Saudi oil fields before it triggers a global economic collapse. What makes it extraordinary is how Glickenhaus shoots action. Handheld, immediate, dangerous looking. A visual style that wouldn't become mainstream for 2 more decades. There's a ski chase in the Austrian Alps that is, to this day, one of the most legitimately thrilling action sequences of its era. Real stunts, real terrain, real momentum. No green screen. Stunt people hurtling down an actual mountain with Glickenhaus's camera right there. You will lean forward. That's not hyperbole. What most people don't know is that Klaus Kinski is in it, the volatile German actor from Herzog's Aguirre and Fitzcarraldo, playing a duplicitous intelligence operative. Brief screen time. The moment he appears, the film's entire atmosphere changes. Kinski had that effect on every frame he ever occupied. A film about nuclear devices used as geopolitical leverage feels considerably less like 1982 fantasy than it did when this first aired at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Track this one down. It is one of the most unjustly forgotten action films of the decade. Number 9, Pray for Death, 1985. Number 9 made me genuinely emotional the first time I saw it. I was not expecting that from a ninja movie. Before American Ninja, before Steven Seagal, before the entire early 90s martial arts boom, there was Sho Kosugi. Pray for Death is the film that proves he deserved to be the biggest action star of his generation. Kosugi plays Akira Saito, a Japanese businessman who emigrates to America with his family to run a restaurant. When his family becomes collateral damage in a local crime dispute, the film pivots from immigrant family drama into something raw, dark, and genuinely devastating. It commits completely, without hesitation, to the emotional stakes of a man of restraint pushed past the limit of human endurance. Kosugi brings a stillness to the role that makes his breaking point feel truly earned. When he moves, with a precision that is almost balletic, you understand you are watching a man who has spent his entire life controlling something that is now being given full permission to be released. What most people don't know is what the villain does. James Booth's Limehouse physically brutalizes a child. Not implied, shown. That decision gives the film a weight and a genuine fury that separates it from every lighter ninja picture surrounding it. When Kosugi delivers his revenge, it doesn't feel like genre satisfaction. It feels like justice. The ninja craze of the mid-80s is having a genuine critical reassessment right now, and Pray for Death consistently emerges as the genre's most serious entry. Kosugi's absence from mainstream action film discussions is a genuine oversight. One of the most emotionally committed action films of the entire 1980s. Full stop. Number 8, Gymkata, 1985. At number 8, a film unlike anything else on this list in cinema history, or possibly in the known universe. Robert Klaus directed Enter the Dragon, one of the greatest martial arts films ever made. Gymkata is also directed by Robert Klaus, and he brought exactly the same sincerity to a concept that should not exist. The result is the most committed accidental masterpiece that cable television ever produced. Kurt Thomas was a real-world gymnastics world champion denied his Olympic moment by the U.S. boycott of the 1980 Moscow Games. Here he plays a government operative recruited to compete in a deadly pursuit game through the fictional Balkan nation of Parmistan. His competitive edge is a unique skill set, gymnastics combined with karate. The film calls this Gymkata. The entire production was designed around finding locations containing pommel horse-shaped structures, because Gymkata only functions where there is something to swing from. This is not a bad film. It is a film completely, absolutely, magnificently sincere about an absurd premise, which is an entirely different thing. Thomas really was Olympic caliber. The boycott really did cost him that moment. That sincerity is what makes Gymkata genuinely unforgettable, rather than merely ridiculous. There is a village in Gymkata, populated entirely by lunatics. In its center, there happens to be a stone well, round, waist height, roughly the dimensions of a gymnastics pommel horse. Cabot finds it. He mounts it, he pirouettes, he kicks approximately 15 lunatics in the face simultaneously. It is the greatest single-scene cable television ever put in front of an unsuspecting channel surfer. There is nothing else like it. Gymkata is on YouTube in HD and has been rediscovered by cult film communities worldwide. The difference between watching it in 1987 and watching it now is that today you can immediately text someone about it. Back then you had to wait until Monday, and they didn't believe you. Not a guilty pleasure, a pure one. Watch it immediately. Number 7, Tango Cash, 1989. All right, we are shifting gears hard here. Number 7 is the most entertainingly, deliberately, almost aggressively chaotic film on this entire list. Sylvester Stallone plays Ray Tango, prim, bespectacled, financially sophisticated. Kurt Russell plays Gabriel Cash, disheveled, wisecracking, his exact opposite. They are framed by villain Yves Perret, Jack Palance at his most magnificently unhinged, sent to prison on fabricated charges, forced to escape together, and tasked with dismantling a drug empire using a vehicle the film describes only as a super rig. What makes it extraordinary is the production chaos underneath it. Director Andrei Konchalovsky, a serious Soviet-trained art filmmaker who had just made Runaway Train, was hired, clashed with everyone, and was replaced mid-shoot by music video director Albert Magnoli. The seams are visible throughout, and here's the paradox. That visible seam is precisely what gives the film its strange electric energy. You can feel the movie not entirely knowing what it is. That uncertainty reads on screen as nervous momentum, which is genuinely, aggressively, unreasonably fun. Jack Palance delivers his dialogue as if performing experimental one-man theater. His line readings have the internal logic of Dada poetry. He is mesmerizing in ways that have nothing to do with conventional acting craft. The Stallone-Russell pairing never happened again. That's a genuine loss. Two massive egos operating in full B-movie register, neither one pretending this is anything other than what it is. Turn your brain to exactly the right frequency, and Tango Cash is a near-perfect film. Disagree in the comments. I'll be waiting. Number 6, Stone Cold, 1991. I know some people are going to push back on this one. Brian Bosworth as a legitimate action movie star? I will die on this hill. Stone Cold, number 6. Bosworth plays Joe Huff, a suspended Alabama cop recruited by the FBI to infiltrate the Brotherhood, a white supremacist biker gang. What makes it extraordinary is not Bosworth, who is perfectly serviceable, but Lance Henriksen as Chains, the gang's leader. One of the greatest villain performances in the entire subgenre. Intelligent, charismatic, threatening, delivered with the full weight of a serious actor, operating well above the material. Henriksen plays Chains not as a brute, but as a philosopher. A man who has constructed an entire worldview around the logic of violence and brotherhood, and who is more lucid and more frightening for it. At its core, Stone Cold is about two men who understand each other completely, moving inevitably toward a collision neither can avoid. That's a real idea, and it gives the film a gravity far exceeding its reputation. What most people don't know is the finale, a full-scale helicopter assault on the Mississippi State Capitol building. A set piece that consumed a major portion of the $25 million budget and delivers every penny on screen. Tactically implausible, logistically spectacular, impossible to look away from. Exactly the kind of sequence that stopped channel surfers dead at 11 p.m. and kept them on the couch until 1 a.m. Stone Cold earned less than $10 million in theaters. Cable television gave it the audience it deserved. Henriksen alone makes it essential. We're now into top 5 territory. Things are about to get considerably more serious. Cable television didn't just rescue these films from obscurity. It built an alternative canon with its own stars, its own aesthetics, and its own emotional logic. A culture built on serendipity, repetition, and the physics of the channel surf. The 5 films remaining are the fullest expressions of that culture. Number 5 proves it immediately. Number 5, The Running Man, 1987. The most thematically important film on this list, and the one most catastrophically underestimated in retrospect. Before Survivor, before Big Brother, before The Hunger Games. The Running Man arrived in 1987, set in a dystopian 2017, describing a world where convicts compete on a nationally televised deathmatch game show. What felt like satirical exaggeration then feels like a nature documentary now. Schwarzenegger plays Ben Richards, a military pilot framed for a massacre he didn't commit, forced onto the game show, and pursued by costumed executioners called stalkers. What makes it extraordinary is Richard Dawson, the real-life Family Feud host, as game show host Damon Killian. He is not written as a villain. He is written as a professional entertainer. That is what makes him terrifying. The stalkers, Dynamo in his light-up suit, Sub-Zero with his hockey equipment and razor wire, Buzzsaw in his chainsaw motorcycle, feel like a direct ancestor of modern WWE storytelling, reality television contestant editing, and influencer persona construction simultaneously. They weren't just entertaining in 1987. They were predictive. What most people don't know is that Andrew Davis, who would later direct The Fugitive, was replaced mid-production by Glazer. The film retains traces of the darker picture Davis was building, and the tension between those two registers gives it its strange, uncomfortable energy. It can make you laugh and make you deeply uneasy within the same scene. That is the film working at its best. That this is discussed primarily as a Schwarzenegger footnote is one of the genuine critical failures of how we categorize 1980s cinema. Essential. Not recommended. Essential. Number 4, Commando, 1985. Number 4 belongs to the most quotable 90 minutes in the history of American action cinema. Not the funniest, not the smartest, the most quotable. There is a difference, and it matters enormously. John Matrix and Schwarzenegger, at the height of his post-Terminator velocity, is a retired Special Forces operative living quietly on a mountain with his daughter and a deer. His daughter is kidnapped by a deposed South American dictator. Matrix has 11 hours to get her back by killing approximately 200 men. The film does not ask you to find this plausible. What makes it extraordinary is screenwriter Steven D'Souza's mastery of the intentional one-liner. Dialogue, written with full awareness that Schwarzenegger's deadpan physicality would transform each line into a delivery event. Director Mark L. Lester built Commando at 90 minutes of pure density. No fat, no tonal miscalculations, no subplots going nowhere. Every scene exists to set up an action sequence, a one-liner, or both simultaneously. What most people don't know is that the original script had a significantly darker, neo-noir tone that Schwarzenegger's instincts progressively recalibrated. That negotiation is why the film sits in such a uniquely sustainable register, and why it plays equally well at age 12 and at age 42. Let off some steam. Bennett! I lied. Don't disturb my friend. He's dead tired. These don't work because they're good jokes. They work because they're delivered by a man who just completed an 11-hour private military operation. Cable television's repetition loop meant audiences had these lines memorized before the film even reached the screen. The anticipation of the delivery was itself a form of pleasure. One of the most perfectly engineered films of the 1980s for exactly what it intended to be. Number 3, Bloodsport, 1988. At number 3, a film that among action fans of a certain age is not underrated at all. Among that audience, it is gospel, which is precisely why it belongs here. Because outside of that audience, it has faded from the mainstream cultural conversation in a way that is not explainable by its actual quality. Before Kickboxer, before Lionheart, before Mortal Kombat borrowed its entire visual DNA from this film's villain, there was Bloodsport. It built the tournament fighting template. Every film that followed exists in its shadow. Van Damme plays Frank Dux, a special forces operative who goes AWOL to compete in the Kumite, a secret full-contact underground tournament in Hong Kong. What makes it extraordinary is not the script, which is functional at best, but Van Damme himself, a physical instrument so specifically gifted that watching him move is a genuine aesthetic experience, regardless of dramatic context. His splits, his spinning heel kicks, his flying combinations are gymnastics disguised as violence. What most people don't know is that Bloodsport sat unreleased on a shelf at Canon Films for over a year. The studio had no confidence in it. Van Damme campaigned obsessively to get it into theaters, attending screenings, generating word of mouth, willing the release into existence. Without that advocacy, there is no Van Damme career as we know it. That's cause and effect. Bolo Yeung as Chong-li simply needs to appear in a frame, and the film's threat level recalibrates entirely. The moment he blinds Van Damme during the Kumite final, and Dux continues to fight by sound and instinct alone, is legitimately tense in a way most contemporary studio action films, with all their resources, fail to achieve. If you've played a fighting video game, watched UFC, or seen any tournament combat film made after 1988, you are inside the world Bloodsport built. Fix that gap in your viewing history immediately. Number 2. Roadhouse, 1989. There's only one film left before number 1. And if you were expecting Roadhouse anywhere else on this list, you were paying attention. Let's be clear about what Roadhouse is not. It is not a misfire. It is not a guilty pleasure. It is not a film that works despite its flaws. Roadhouse is a film that is exactly as good as it intends to be, at a register of intention that no other film in its era, possibly in any era, has ever located, occupied, and made permanently its own. Patrick Swayze plays James Dalton, the world's most philosophically sophisticated bouncer, NYU philosophy degree, one of the most dangerous men in Missouri, hired to clean up a bar called the Double Deuce. What makes it extraordinary is that the film treats every single one of these facts with complete, unwavering sincerity. When Dalton says, "Pain don't hurt," to his bar staff, Swayze delivers it like a man who has thought deeply about the relationship between physical endurance and emotional detachment. He is not joking. The film is not joking. The original script was darker, more neo-noir in its violence. Swayze's involvement shifted it toward its final register. A piece of self-aware myth-making that understands it is building a folk hero, not a realistic person. Dalton is already famous when we meet him. People speak of him in reverent whispers. The film gives Swayze full permission to play that, and Swayze honors it completely. Sam Elliott's Wade Garrett is one of cinema's greatest mentor figures. Laconic, leather-skinned, utterly weathered. Every line lands with the weight of a gospel verse. The Jeff Healey Band performing live in the Double Deuce throughout the film gives Roadhouse a sonic texture, a sense of a real specific place that no composer could have manufactured. TBS and TNT ran Roadhouse so relentlessly through the 90s that it became the defining dad movie of its era. You come downstairs at 11 p.m., your father is already watching it, he says, "Sit down. This is the good part." And every part is the good part. That is Roadhouse, not just a film, a ritual. Brad Wesley destroys a car dealership with a monster truck for personal reasons. Dalton performs field surgery on himself in a parking lot. A man's throat is removed by hand, and the film treats this as a reasonable resolution to a disagreement. I have never fully recovered. I don't want to. Roadhouse is number 2. Number 1 is the reason we are having this conversation at all. There's only one film on this list that, in my opinion, does everything simultaneously, defines the cable TV phenomenon, creates a genuine mythology around a single channel's programming decisions, transforms a box office failure into an immortal work of pop culture, and does all of this with such complete, committed earnestness that no modern irony can touch it. When you think about what cable television could be at its absolute best, at its most serendipitous, at its most accidentally profound, it's this, The Beastmaster, 1982. Don Coscarelli, Phantasm in 1979, Bubba Hotep in 2002, operates in a specific frequency, sincere fantasy with a raw physical edge, just outside the mainstream, surviving precisely because of that distance. The Beastmaster is his most accessible film, and simultaneously his most mythologized. Dar, played by Mark Singer, is a young warrior with the innate ability to communicate telepathically with animals. A black tiger, 2 ferrets, a hawk, seeking revenge against the sorcerer Max, played by Rip Torn, who murdered his father. The plot is adjacent to Conan the Barbarian, which arrived in theaters the same year. That adjacency destroyed the Beastmaster at the box office. In multiplexes, it couldn't find a distinct identity in the shadow of the bigger film. Cable television gave it something theaters never could. This is not a Conan knockoff. It is a film about radical empathy, a man whose power comes not from strength or conquest, but from communication. Dar doesn't command animals. He understands them. In a sword and sorcery genre whose default register is domination, that distinction changes everything. At its core, The Beastmaster is about what it means to be connected to the living world, to be tuned to frequencies most people can't hear. and what that costs a person who must also survive in a world built for violence. That is not a small idea. That is an idea cable television beamed into living rooms, to teenagers who couldn't have articulated it yet, who felt it anyway. What most people don't know about the Beastmaster is the nicknames. Not just one. 2, TBS ran it so frequently, sometimes multiple times in a single week, that viewers began calling TBS the Beastmaster station. HBO was renamed, "Hey, Beastmaster's on." These were not jokes. They were not ironic internet memes. They were acknowledgments made by actual human beings and actual conversations of a real and measurable cultural phenomenon. A film became so embedded in a channel's identity that the channel became synonymous with the film. No streaming algorithm has ever achieved this. No playlist has ever achieved this. This is what involuntary discovery, built through repetition and serendipity, actually produces. There is a moment in The Beastmaster, and I'm not going to tell you exactly when because you need to be caught off guard, where Dar calls his animals to him in the middle of an impossible situation, and the ferrets, the hawk, and the tiger all answer simultaneously. For a moment, the film achieves something that transcends its genre, its budget, its period, its every material limitation. You are watching a man who is not alone in the world, no matter what the world has done to him. And in that moment, everything that cable television mythology can be, that particular intimacy between a film and an audience that found each other by accident at midnight on a Tuesday, is right there, compressed into 30 seconds of practical effects and Mark Singer's completely committed performance. That is the reason I'm having this conversation with you. Rip Torn as Max is one of the great villainous performances of the decade. Theatrical, physical, absolutely committed. The practical creature effects have aged better than most digital work produced 20 years later. And the film's texture, that authentic sword and sorcery atmosphere Coscarelli assembled on a shoestring, has a warmth and weight that no amount of budget can manufacture. The Beastmaster is number one, not simply because it is the most cable-famous film ever made. It is number one because it understands, better than anything else on this list, that the films cable television chose to love were never really about the films. They were about the experience of finding something in the dark, a stranger's mythology, someone else's heroes, a world completely unlike yours, and recognizing, inexplicably, something true in it. That recognition is what separates a great cable film from a work that will still matter 40 years from now. That is The Beastmaster. If you haven't seen it, you have a genuinely good evening waiting for you. Fix that immediately. From number 10 to number 1, what this list proves is that cable television built a cinematic canon through a mechanism that has never existed before and will never exist again. Involuntary discovery. These films were not chosen by their audiences. They found their audiences through repetition, serendipity, and the specific physics of a remote control in a dark living room at midnight. This isn't about nostalgia. It's about what happens when art reaches people sideways. When a film doesn't ask to be watched but simply appears, catches something in you didn't know was catchable, and stays there permanently. But I know you have opinions. What got left off? Is there a film from USA up all night? From late night TBS? From Cinemax at 1 a.m. that should be here and isn't? Should Roadhouse be number 1? I read every comment. Tell me where I got it wrong. If you made it this far, you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. The next video is coming. And if this list told you anything about how much is hiding just below the surface of what mainstream culture chose to remember, that one will tell you considerably more.